Ladies and gentlemen, we are live.
Welcome back to the MMA Opinion Roundtable. I am your host, Paul O'D, and joining me in today's panel, we have the MMA Opinion podcast co-host and SBG Cork City head coach, Mr. Liam O'Griffin. How are you doing today, Liam?
All good.
Very good. We also have MMA Opinions admin's newest member joining us all the way from Galway, Mr. Thomas Lan. How are you doing, Thomas?
I'm good.
Very good. And we have Twitter statistician and the mind behind the tape, Mr. Andy Hickey. How are you doing?
I still have a hangover from 259, but we're getting there.
And finally, all the way from across the pond, representing the Yanks in this version of the MMA Roundtable, MMA Opinion admin OG, Mr. Ben Doucette. How are you doing today, Ben?
Great, fellas. How we doing?
Very good. So, look, without further ado, we'll get things kicked off here. But before we do, I just want to say that if anyone wants to comment in live, we will read out your comments. We will get to them all. What we'll do is we'll cover each topic. Each person has a topic on the panel. We'll get to those, and at the end of each topic, we will answer some of your questions. So to kick things off, Mr. Liam O'Griffin, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So my topic this week is all about the Eastern Wave, and we've talked about this in the podcast a good few times. So my background coming from the amateur side of things and bringing Irish team members to the European and World Championships at IMAF level, I recognize that there is an Eastern Wave coming. We're getting the leading edge of it at the moment in some of the bigger organizations, but we have seen nothing yet. So, like, it used to be that a Russian in the UFC was a rare breed. I don't know if you, like, maybe Andy would be able to tell us who the first Russian in the UFC was, or one of the very, very early ones. But as far as I remember, Oleg Taktarov was one of the first Russians in there. And
he would be the first.
If anybody is watching live and you know an earlier Russian than that, please comment in. But then you're talking like a couple of years later, we have like Fedor's doing the rounds on the international scene. And then you have to go all the way to Andrei Arlovsky, who wasn't even a Russian, he was a Belarusian. And like the kind of the mystique around the Russian fighters in the UFC at that time was like, you know, whereas now we have absolute contenders in every division and probable champions by the end of the year in multiple divisions. I know we just lost one this weekend with Piotr Jan making an absolute mess of a decision to throw a knee to lose his own title. But you're looking at Askarov coming up behind him. You're looking at Magomed Ankalaev in the light heavyweight division. You're looking at Hamzat Kaimiev in the welterweight division. You're looking at who else we got?
Magomed Sharapov.
There, yeah, Magomed Sharipov. There's so many of them there, and they're just the leading edge of the Russian teams. Now you're starting to see a lot of more Chinese athletes coming through, especially in the ladies divisions. You have obviously our flyweight champ Zhang Weili, and what's the other girl, Paul? You know her name better than I do.
Yan Xuanan.
There you go. I was never going to get that right. On top of that, you have we had a couple of Korean lads over the years, but they're coming back. They're coming back, and the reason I know they're coming back is because I see all these guys in the IMAFs, and they're snapping up all the medals in all the weight classes. Some of the ones that you're going to hear very, very, very soon from the UK, Mr. Mohamed Mokaev is fighting for Brave. That kid is going to be in the UFC within the next 24 months, mark my words. A fighter that's, I think he's from Dagestan, but fighting for Bahrain, Murtaza Tala Ali, is a middleweight, dropping down to welterweight, an absolute animal. That dude's going to cause problems for all of the guys in the UFC. They have a super heavyweight by the name of Pasha, who's like a rock star over in Bahrain. You've got two Shamils in the heavyweight division. One of them knocked out Ryan Spillane in the 2019 Worlds. And there's just more and more and more coming. And we haven't even mentioned Kazakhstan. China, well, we have mentioned China, but Japan have a very, very strong team. They don't have a huge team, but the competitors that they do bring are very, very strong. So this is my I see a wave coming, right? So my question for the panel: what the hell are we going to do? All the European and American fighters, how do we prepare for these guys? They bring a totally different style that we wouldn't have seen, or we don't see in the UFC up until recently, and that a lot of fighters who don't fight outside the US or don't fight outside of Europe won't have experienced firsthand until they get manhandled by a Khamzat Chimaev. How do we handle it? So does anybody have any ideas on how some of the American or European gyms are training to deal with this? I don't know. Ben, you guys you have strong wrestling backgrounds over there. So, I mean, you've been dealing with kind of Russian wrestlers on the Olympic stage for quite a few years. Are you finding that more MMA gyms are kind of having problems with Russian fighters as of late?
Well, the problem with a lot of these gyms in America is these guys specifically train with this one gym for so long that they don't adapt the way that they're supposed to, or the way that they should. Like loyalty around in Americas is really strong with these gyms, and if you're only specializing in one thing, you're not adapting the way you should. So, I mean, and like you said, we're very wrestle heavy over here, but what happens when you get on the mat and you're underneath somebody and you can't move? It's a whole different level.
Yeah, and that's what's happening is like we Ireland's not known for its wrestling, but we have gotten decent at wrestling to the point where we can defend against European style wrestlers, and to a certain extent, kind of lower level American wrestlers as well. But then you put like a Khabib Nurmagomedov on top of you, or you put like a Khamzat Chimaev on top of you. That's a different animal altogether. And until you experience that, you're not prepared for it, you know. So like for me personally, I think that any up and coming amateur fighters who don't expose themselves to high level Asian wrestling, not just like American wrestling is a very, very high level. It's just a different type of wrestling that the Asian athletes are using. And at the moment, they're one step ahead of the rest of the MMA community. I think everybody needs to catch up.
The funny thing is, you can see with the American wrestlers is the second they're on their back, they're like a turtle. They have nowhere to go. They don't know. They have a really hard time getting up off their back. I mean, even some of the most high level American wrestlers were stuck on their back and they're not going anywhere. Ben Askren was one of those dudes that wrestled, and once he got put on his back, he had a hard time getting back up.
And I think Drew Dober this weekend as well showed kind of something similar. Like Drew Dober has obviously got some wrestling from high school. I know he wouldn't be an Olympian or anything like that, but I mean, he was just shut down this weekend. You know, absolutely just shut down by Islam Makhachev. And that's the thing that I feel that both European and American and even Brazilian MMA fighters need to prepare for that wave that's coming. There's more of them coming. This is only the tip of the iceberg, and we need to get ready for it. Andy, do you remember any other early Russian fighters? Did I get them all?
I think remember Igor Zinoviev fought Frank Shamrock. I think it was like UFC 17 for the title, and he got slammed in about 12 seconds flat, and then left the division. But I think I think the Eastern Wave have far more advantages from what they're surrounded in as well. Like you mentioned, China there. There's two UFC performance centers in the world. One is in Las Vegas and one is in China. You know, the fighters over there, they don't have to do anything in their lives bar go to the gym, work out, train. They get fed there, they get bed there. I'm sure they can stay there if they want. And then you look at Eastern European fighters, the options they have when they turn pro. You know, I speak just from British and Ireland is where I'd be used of, and you see the amount of promotions that are over in Eastern Europe. KSW, ACA, Brave, Octagon, they've so many options to go in there and fight high-level talent. But realistically, in this side of the water, Cage Warriors is about as high as it goes, and even Cage Warriors is probably not on the level of a KSW. Now, I know we have regional shows, but the guys probably aren't facing what they're facing outside there. So, the other thing I'd say then is from grappling perspective, you always say a good grappler will be the good striker, and in Ireland especially, grappling is not something that you're brought up to do. You're brought up to go out and play field sports, and we're not I'm sure Liam, as a head coach down there, whatever level of kids you have, it's probably not a huge wave of numbers that know, grappling straight off the bat is probably new to them. Whereas you see in Dagestan, especially, it's like they come out the womb knowing how to grapple. So as a country, we're probably behind. So I see huge advantages for the Eastern Bloc. And just looking at IMAF as well, if you look at the medals table over the last couple of years, Kazakhstan seems to be going really well in it as well.
Yeah.
So I'd be in agreement with you. I think we're going to get hit by a massive wave, and you can see it already coming. And look at the signings Bellator have made as well, not just the UFC. Bellator are going to be really, really strong on this front too.
Yeah. And Thomas, you're from Poland, so what do you guys do with the Russians over there?
I suppose one thing that comes to mind is what happened in Brazil a few years ago, where there seemed to be nearly every second champion or nearly every second elite fighter in each division was from Brazil. And it seemed to be that there was just this big drive all at once. And that kind of faded a little bit in the last 5 or 6 years. Like, we haven't seen as many Brazilians come true. And I'm just wondering if it's kind of like we're watching something similar in countries like Russia, where there's this sudden influx and maybe there's particular techniques been adapted. So in the short term, while people are adjusting to regional styles and techniques, there will be certain advantages, but that ultimately, where is the infrastructure? The main infrastructure is still in America. And I suppose it's where the sport is most popular still. Like, another thing to consider would be, we'll say, the athletes. What options do they have, we'll say, for high-level athletes in Russia? Are there other career options for them that will pull away a certain amount of the talent pool? So I guess I don't really know how many other options there are. I suppose in the poorer countries there'll be fewer options. So you'll certainly see it, I suppose, in the likes of, as we've seen in Dagestan. And as well, when you've people growing up in hard environments where they grow up harder, made of harder stuff, and it's harder to impose your will on someone who's, I suppose, been through those kinds of challenges in life versus someone who is maybe, for example, grown up in Dublin or grown up in New York in a middle-class lifestyle. The level of adversity would be different. So I think until they have solutions to that, there will be problems.
If you talk to some of the fighters that grew up in Dublin, they'll tell you how tough it was on the streets as well, though.
I don't think it probably doesn't compare to a civil war in Dagestan, maybe, or
maybe not quite.
No.
But there's been a couple of questions there, or a couple of comments that came in there, just reading them down the side. Kevin said, when he was involved in Wacko kickboxing, we witnessed the strength and depth of Russia, in particular as a team in the ring, in ring sports and other Eastern European countries. It's only a matter of time until we start seeing these guys and girls come from the world of K1 into MMA. And yeah, we're already seeing it. And like the thing about the Kazakhstani team is that they don't just have the wrestling. They also have very, very high level kickboxing as well. And I know Kazakhstan is very, very strong in karate circles as well. It's Ken Allen from YouTube says, how do you guys see Dean Barry doing against some of these Russian guys? Now, obviously Dean Barry is flying the flag for Ireland in May, and we're all 100% behind him. He doesn't have to deal with a Russian in his first fight out, and I know he also is one of his teammates, Jer Harris, who I had the pleasure of being over in Bahrain with him twice. He's been training with Mohammed Mokaev, so and obviously they've got On Roddy up there as well, so they're going to be training hard for it. My concern is that unless you felt that Russian kind of tie up on your legs by yourself, by one of those guys, it's going to be a shock at some point. So hopefully they get some Russians or Dagestani wrestlers in there. I know he's trained over in TriStar as well, so we're batting for him anyway, Ken. Hopefully he'll do well.
I'm just going to throw the floor to Andy there, and he's going to bring up the next topic for us. We'll discuss that in more detail again at a later date, I think. Just running time-wise there, we better move on to the next topic. So,
I know.
Mr. Andy Hickey, what do you have for us next?
Well, my question revolves around the explosion in the double champ era we're living in. So Adesanya was going for the weekend against Jan Blachowicz. So BJ Penn was the first one, UFC 94. Then we wait all the way from McGregor, and now we've seen Nunes, Cejudo, Cormier, Dillashaw, Adesanya. Adesanya was also the 29th fighter to fight for a belt in multiple divisions. Andrade is going to be the 30th when she does it. Now hers is warranted, but I thought at the weekend, if we were treating it as a sport, I thought Glover Teixeira should have been fighting at light heavyweight, and I think Robert Whittaker had probably done enough to get another title shot at middleweight. It seemed to me to be a decision by Damon White to try and cash in on Israel Adesanya's marketability, get that double champ status and start getting him in there. And they were clearly trying to build to something with John Jones by bringing Israel up there to cash in at it. I don't like it. I'm a fan of the sport of MMA, not the existence of the UFC. And when I watch it, I want to see the best in each weight class fight each other. And then if there's a reason for someone to move division, like Amanda Nunes, I thought was very warranted at the time, then they go with it. So I want to get feedback from you. Where are you at with it? And I suppose, Liam, as someone who coaches fighter, the great Ryan Spillane, that's going to be a Bellator champion, how do you view the jumping we're seeing in weight classes? Because Bellator have also been guilty of it at the moment. Douglas Lima did it, Ryan Bader did it, Pitbull did it. So it's becoming quite common in the sport at the moment as they look to cash in.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it either. I prefer a fighter to dominate from one weight class. And if, as Dominic Cruz said, a fighter cleans out his or her own weight division, like we had with Demetrius Johnson, like we had with John Jones and Anderson Silva, well then no problem. Go ahead and reach up for the next challenge. But kind of having somebody just win a title and then bounce up for the next one, I know Conor kind of set a trend. He kind of got there first before a lot of them, and now everybody wants to be a champ. I don't like it. I think it slows down the divisions, and I hope we're over. I hope we're over the phase for a year or so anyway. After this weekend.
And Ben, I suppose you're on a different kind of side of it from us. So we're European fans, obviously, and then you stay in the States where, haven't been to a lot of fights over there. The United States seems to like the big show and the glam of everything and the aura of it. So, how do you guys, the true MMA fans over there, how do you view it from your perspective over there?
I think a lot of it has to do with the day and age we live in, with the internet and media being what it is. It's easy to hype these guys up really quick and to get people to buy into the fact that they're potentially legitimate for a champ status. But for me, when Demetrius Johnson, who beat literally everybody he ever came in contact with, essentially didn't decide to move up and capture another belt, there shouldn't be all these other guys just jumping up and trying to do it. It's kind of like Liam said, you need to clean out your division and take care of business before you decide that you are eligible for bigger and better things. Conor, it made sense. The guy's marketability was off the chain. So it would have done better business for everybody if he was a double champ. But these other guys that have tried it, to me, it was just part of the media machine pushing these guys and people buying into it. Americans will buy anything if you put a title match on it. I promise you that. So, I paid money myself to go see James Toney on a card. So I don't, we'll buy anything.
Yeah, I see. What I'd see back in the day, when fighters went on these massive runs, like case in point in the comments there, Anderson Silva. I don't know when he used to jump up and weight. I remember he first fought James Irvin, and then he went up to take on Forrest Griffin, who was the champ 6 months earlier, and he decimated him. So it would have been very easy to put those titles on guys like Anderson Silva back in the day. Maybe not George St. Pierre, who didn't want to jump up, but this trend could have kicked off a lot earlier. Tom, what's your thoughts on it? Are you a fan of it, or do you want to keep promoting it? Do you want Dana White to keep doing this to us?
So with regard to Izzy, normally I don't agree with the champ. I suppose the champ versus champ fights. I do see why they did it with Izzy, because on his run-up, he had beaten a lot of big names, like, he'd beaten Brad Tavares, he'd beaten Derek Brunson, Kelvin Gastelum. He'd beaten a lot of ranked opponents before defending the belt. So a lot of those guys are still in the division. And even Marvin Vettori, I mean, he has a win over him. So when you count up the ranked opponents, there is an awful lot of names that Izzy has already struck off there. Now, you can definitely make the case that he should rematch Whitaker, and I certainly would. But I suppose I don't ever really like it because it does hold up the two divisions, and I think it's really fantastic for both divisions that Jan won, because it means both to move forward and the deserving contenders get to, I suppose, get to put their best foot forward later this year. One thing I found interesting was that Izzy is, I think, the first champ moving up in weight to lose since BJ Penn versus GSP. So no, I know DC even last year lost a rematch with Stipe. So the fact that there has been this, I suppose, balance with the lighter fighter isn't necessarily always winning now, whereas before it kind of felt like, well, every time the fighter was moving up in weight, they were winning the belt. This might maybe make some of them think twice, or maybe slow them down a little bit in kind of driving this in the future, I hope.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's the fighters driving it. I have to think, I'm so cynical that Dana White is looking at them and going, I can make money off of you. You know, I can sell 1.5 million pay-per-views off of Adesanya Jones and cash in. That's how I do it. And I'd say the matchmakers aren't even coming to them with a middleweight offer. He's saying they looked at Jan Blachowicz and said, he is the weakest light heavyweight champion we've had. This is our opportunity. Let's go for it. And it backfired badly on them. That's how I'd view it now. And very, very, very cynical as it is, but I think it has to be true. Like, Paul, you're a bit like me in your thoughts. How do you see it?
Not in this scenario. I'm all for champ. I'm one of the few guys that, even going back to Anderson Silva, we touched on him and his pomp and the GSP. I was the one from early doors calling for that fight. And to this day, I still think it's one of the fights that we truly missed out on in the sport. No, I'm torn in the sense that I don't believe that everyone that wins a belt has earned a shot to go straight up and fight for another belt. They have to have some kind of record in that division or have cleaned out the division to some extent. But someone with the stature of Izzy, someone with the stature of Conor, I'm all for them moving up for new challenges. I think it's more to do with just kind of getting a new look, and there's new excitement about the fight. There's more question marks. There's more variables. I buy into it. Maybe I'm easy to sell on these kind of things, but for me, I do enjoy them. And I just see there that Kevin has a comment as well, which it's worse when they put the BMF titles. It will be a worry to the return of freak fights. And again, I'm all for the BMF title.
I prefer freak fights over BMF titles any day.
Yeah, I get it. Liam wants to see Dada 5000 versus Kimbo style fights.
God no.
Look, they're going to be a part of the sport. It's the fact that they're creeping in more commonplace, I think, is the worry for a lot of people. Every now and then, I think once a year, once every 2 years, you need that super fight that people can grab a hold of and get excited about. I know I talked about UFC 259 as if it was the biggest card in UFC history, and I still, after the bouts, think that it was. Like you say, maybe not every champion is deserving of going up, but I think when they do have the allure of Izzy or a Conor, I'm all for it.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Contrasting opinions, but no, I understand it. Like the one fight I would have said, you said George St. Pierre and Anderson, which was always a magic, but I remember Jose Aldo and Anthony Pettis were scheduled, and I think that would have been a real good one back in the day.
It would have been a super fight, yeah. And we are going to move on to our next topic, and we have, all the way from America, we have Mr. Ben Doucette. What do you have for us today, Ben?
All right, so the state of commentary lately has been something that we've discussed a lot inside the group chat, and it leaves a lot to be desired, I feel, especially now with the news that Dan Hardy's been released and there isn't really a major fighter covering the European side of things anymore. And Joe Rogan seems to be less and less interested in what he's doing. What do we do from here with the commentary? Like, who is going to take over the European mantle that Dan Hardy left behind? Do we see Joe Rogan leaving sometime soon to do his own thing? I think Liam mentioned it the other day, like doing like a fight companion thing. I've just had a lot of problems with the commentary lately, with biased commentary.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was
Well, I thought I was maybe doing something wrong. I'm like, wait a minute. But I guess I'll kick it to you then, Liam. Who's going to take over the European side of things now that Dan Hardy's gone?
I don't know. We don't really have. Do you know what? Actually, I did have an idea on this. I think Mr. John Kavanagh is going to make a play for this because he's doing a lot of podcast work with BT Sports at the moment, and he would be a phenomenal asset on. Obviously, you know, as long as it didn't interfere with the schedule of his fighters on a card. But I think he would be like we have had a series of high-level fighters becoming a commentator. We haven't had a whole lot of coaches do the same thing. I know Trevor Whitman kind of steps in and does his thing every so often, but I think someone of the likes of John Kavanagh, James Krause, Trevor Whitman to come in and actually do it more kind of full-time, or someone of that caliber, that might be a good shout. But yeah, I think it's Dan Hardy is a huge loss. I don't know. I've been hearing some rumors as to what happened there, but I don't know. I don't know if you guys have the full story of it at this stage as to why he was cut or what the story was. But yeah, he's a huge loss. But I'm putting John Kavanagh's name in the ring anyway.
Good show. All right, and like I said about Joe Rogan, he seems like super uninvested in what he's doing. I mean, the other night he said that Drew Dober was the most underrated fighter in the UFC. Which maybe he was just trying to blow smoke to promote the fight, but it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Paul, what are your thoughts on Joe Rogan and what he should do from here?
See, I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, but not currently in the commentary booth. There's a very funny comment there from David Askins. I don't know if it was tongue in cheek or not, but he says, "Bring back Goldberg." Yeah, look, there's a lot of candidates. I think the obvious one for the European market would be Michael Bisping, but unfortunately he is permanently based in the United States now, so I don't know if he'd even take that on. But they do have a huge roster coming through of new commentators, some of them very good. You have Chiesa, Laura Sanko, Alan Juban. You have, I'm trying to think off the top of my head now, Paul Felder. And there's a few more guys that are all kind of in there. One of those guys I'm sure would be happy with the opportunity to come over and take that mantle on and kind of because they get more airtime. They're not in rotation. They'd have their own slot. I just see a comment here from Kevin O'Sullivan as well, who believes the MMA Opinion should do it. No problem, Kevin. If you have a contact there, we'll happily take over the commentary team. There might be as much shit talk as the DC Joe Rogan dynamic. You should know now at this stage, Kevin, we talk as much shit as anyone. So, and there's just another comment there quickly as well. Rogan and DC should never be allowed to do a pay-per-view together. They miss half the fights trying to impress each other with stupid jokes. And this is my issue. I think DC on his own with John Anik is very good. I think Joe Rogan on his own with John Anik still has a place in the sport. They still do a good job. But I just think together they get lost in conversation. They stop talking about the fights and they get distracted. And the bias stuff, they kind of feed off each other and it ends up being a lot of biased commentary.
That was my next comment, actually. I feel like lately, especially, there's been a lot of biased commentary. Andy, how do you feel about the way that these guys have been doing the commentary since this whole lockdown has started, really?
I think Ken is spot on. It's the issue at the heart is Joe Rogan and DC. DC has those puppy dog eyes when he sees them, and he's trying to make jokes all the time, and they're not watching the fight. But I think for Joe, I think he's not a fan of the sport anymore. He clearly doesn't follow anything outside the events he covers or does his fight companion with. You know, most of us would have grown up in the era where it was Joe and Mike Goldberg making noise and Joe talking about the analytical approach to the game. And then when they cut Goldberg, the UFC went towards that analyst role. Like, they brought in guys like Dominic Cruz. There's no jokes. It's factually explaining every movement in the fight. The same with Paul Felder, and Dan Hardy was the perfect European for it. So I think, you know, the UFC kind of created a bed for themselves when they went in this approach. And as the sport grows, we become more knowledgeable and the fan base has become more knowledgeable, and we can see that Joe Rogan is talking through his arse most of the time. So I'd like to see, personally, I just think Laura Sanko, who does some commentary for LFA, I think it's time for a female to get her shot in there. I don't see any harm. A lot of the guys they bring through haven't, been anything amazing. And one concern I would have is for John Gooden, who, he's been Dan Hardy's companion there since they came through. And when I looked back on Anthony Smith's breakdown with John Gooden the other day, in retrospect, John didn't look like the same person. So I would have worries for there. And last person I'll call out is Brad Wharton from Cage Warriors. Get him in there. He's some man.
Yeah,
but I'm like the guys with Joe Rogan.
Thomas, I guess I'll ask the same question to you. Who do you see fitting best now that Dan Hardy's gone? And what are your thoughts about Joe Rogan and how invested he is? And is there a commentary team that works the best? Like, my personal favorite is Paul Felder, if he would just get rid of that cup check thing that he does. But
yeah, so I was struggling for a while to come up with somebody. I mean, the names that came to my mind were Ross Pearson, but I mean, is he that relevant anymore? Darren Till, I mean, with his accent, would that translate to everybody that they're looking to target? And then, I mean, the other name would be Leon Edwards, who doesn't seem to have a great relationship with the UFC. So again, I would just question whether they would offer him that. I think he would potentially be very good. But another two choices, my two top choices maybe, would be Jan Blachowicz and or Joanna. And I think just because both of them, Joanna, there would be a lot of controversy with her. I'm sure she would be very outspoken in her analysis, and I think it would draw a lot of attention. And as well, the fact that she has that kind of, I suppose, being from Poland, you would be pulling in a wider European market maybe, and even kind of more towards the east and maybe Russian region, you'd be kind of tapping into that a little bit as well, or at least acknowledging it. And again, the same with Jan. And I mean, Jan has been on such an incredible run, but I mean, is he 38 now? He's coming to the end of his career. It might be the right time when he's kind of hitting his stride as a champion that they kind of slot him in with this. Again, he seems to have a very good relationship with the promotion.
My guy that I mean, for me, my thought for picking a guy to take up the European mantle was Alexander Gustafsson's not really doing much. He's on his way out. He has fairly good English, so it wouldn't be a translation issue for him. I don't know what else he's doing. So for me, that was my pick.
Good shout. We are going to throw the floor to Mr. Thomas Land now. You're going to bring us on to our next topic. Yeah,
so I suppose on Saturday night, the biggest fight for me was the Bantamweight championship fight. And I thought we had a great contest up until the unfortunate finish. Obviously, this rematch, I think it's inevitable that they'll have to rematch. And it's going to have a big delay on the Bantamweight division. It's likely that there'll be, I haven't seen yet if it's going to be 120 days or 180 days of I suppose suspension for aljo or medical suspension. So I'm just wondering how long until they make that fight. Is that going to be towards the very end of the year? And I mean, you've TJ Dillashaw returning. You've Corey Sandhagen, who seems to have done enough to warrant a title shot. So with all of these moving parts, Henry Cejudo has been talking about coming back. And I guess my first question would be for Ben. So with all of this talk from Cejudo that he'll be coming back, what does that do for the Bantamweight division?
I like Henry Cejudo, and I think that he was obviously going to be a tough test for anybody at 135 pounds. He's an exciting fighter, and he's got a great skill set. But I think that it immediately puts a logjam in there for guys, especially like a Corey Sandhagen, anybody underneath him, because he's obviously going to be a big-time player as soon as he steps in. Personally, if he comes back, I would like to see him fight TJ Dillashaw again, just because it would be awesome. But I don't know who he would fight when he comes back. I mean, who would he fight? There's nobody. that has a matchup available for him. I just think it just puts another logjam in the division that's, like you said, is already going to be on hold for 120 to 180 days based off how long Sterling's gone for. So,
yeah, and I suppose, yeah, I'd be kind of thinking the same. I was wondering if they would look at doing the rematch with TJ. I suppose if he wants to come back earlier, they might have to move into that. And I suppose for Andy, I was wondering. So Cejudo is 34, and in these lighter weight classes, they tend to have a shorter. I suppose when they hit their 30s, the clock starts to run out a lot quicker with their careers. So I'm just wondering, how short is the window for Cejudo to make his return?
Well, I don't envision Cejudo returning purely based off the fact that he has only ever main evented one pay-per-view and it sold 250,000 views. So I don't see Dana White coming after him. But if he is to return and you're bringing age into it, I think the guy that perfectly lines up for it is Davison Figueiredo at flyweight. Figueiredo is 33. He's the oldest flyweight champion. Cejudo is actually the oldest bantamweight champion of all time. And I think it's like the guy said, it's logjammed at bantamweight. When you look at flyweight, you've got the Moreno rematch and you've got Askarov there. They're not big names. Cejudo could bring something to that division. But for bantamweight, you can't do anything with him. You can't. Like, he knocked out Cruz fairly convincingly. The Dillashaw rematch sells, but they look like they want to do Dillashaw Sandhagen because they see something in Sandhagen. So I just don't get the value in bringing Henry Cejudo back for the UFC. I don't think he sells enough for what he'll cost and the strain he'll put on the divisions he comes back to.
Yeah, and then I suppose, yeah, I actually hadn't thought of him. I suppose as far as Figueiredo. But I suppose really, I don't see him wanting to cut that weight again. Like he seemed to be so happy not to have to cut it again. So I would be kind of wondering, maybe Paul, you can help me with this. Would say if he does return, how does he affect the prospects of TJ and Corey Sandhagen? Like, do you think he would leapfrog them, or do you think he'd be looking to have that rematch with TJ?
Yeah, so I think Henry only returns for a title fight, and I think he only returns at bantamweight as well. Similar to you, I just don't see him cutting that weight. He had issues during his career. He's a little bit older. He's been off for a while. I don't see him wanting to cut down to 25, and I don't think the Davison Figueiredo fight does anything for him. There's a little bit of hype around the bantamweight division now, and that's why he's trying to reinsert his name in it. However, we have seen this from Henry Cejudo, and there's form there that he's trying to insert his name in the division, and there's no follow through. Whether that's his side that he's not that interested, or whether the UFC themselves aren't that interested, like Andy touched on, it's either or. The thing with this that I found interesting, and Into Thin Air commented on it there as well. It was the picture after with Sterling and trying to push that narrative that he's next up for the title fight. Here's why I don't see Henry returning right now. Because there's no way the UFC makes that fight ahead of the next Yan fight. And there's no way that if TJ is returning against Corey, that they're not next up. So regardless of what he's doing, he could be sitting out for 2 years waiting for that title opportunity. And I think by then the steam has gone off it. I can't see him returning at that point. Yeah.
And I suppose my final question will be for Liam. I've been wondering about I suppose the timing of it a little bit as well, because Volkanovski is going to be fighting in a few weeks, and he has been really, I mean, Cejudo is really pushing, has pushed in the past really hard to get that chance at fighting for a third belt. And my question would be, do you think that he may have some sort of strategy here where he wants to draw attention to himself, and then assuming a Volkanovski win, he would petition to fight for the featherweight strap?
Your audio's gone, Liam, I'd say.
I actually muted myself because there's something going on upstairs. Yeah, don't ask me to explain what's going on. It sounds all sorts of wrong. But,
fair enough.
Sorry, Volkanovski is the champ at featherweight, right? So if he fights him, he gets the title.
Yeah, but he's saying about moving up to get the 3 belts.
Yeah.
Henry Cejudo's chirped away at that prospect as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm all for anybody taking the belt off Volkanovski. I don't want him to be the champion at all, so bring it on. But I think Cejudo is already small at bantamweight. He'd be a complete midget at featherweight. I mean, it would be a great publicity stunt, and I'm sure UFC will sell the hell out of it. I don't know. I kind of tend to agree with one of the commenters into thin air saying that he's only flirting with it. I don't think he's serious about coming back. I think he's just kind of stealing other people's thunder, kind of like what John Jones has been doing every time there's been a UFC on in recent times. He waits for something to happen and then makes a tweet and then makes it all about him. That's kind of what I read into that. I don't see him coming back at all. I'll be honest.
Yeah. I'd be afraid, all right, that he's doesn't come back. But I suppose it's just the strength of his later resume was so. I mean, the names on it were so. I suppose so well known, and I would just love to have seen him do more with his career. So I'm always kind of looking at potential ways he might try and get back in, and that, yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, and sticking with the bantamweights, my topic of the week is obviously the decision and the DQ win in the title fight at bantamweight. I just wanted to touch on this because we put up a couple of posts during the week about this on the Facebook page, and I have never seen people get so heated so quick with reference to this topic. So my take on it first is that at the end of the day, it was an illegal strike. Aljamain Sterling might have been play acting a little bit. Looking at it a couple of times now, perhaps he definitely was, but he had no obligation to fight on under those circumstances. It's one of those situations where a couple of people touched on it, that we've seen people get knocked out and get back up and they're fine a couple of minutes later. I want to stress this, that nobody's fine a couple of minutes after getting knocked out. They might get their wherewithal back around them, but there's damage on board and they are severely compromised for that period of time, however long that may be. It could be an hour, it could be several hours. But with that knee to the head, Aljamain Sterling would have been compromised for the rest of that fight. Yes, he was losing the fight, but the onus is on Peter Yan to keep his strikes legal. And what I touched on here was the fact that, or in the comment section, was the fact that Peter Yan was winning the fight. If Peter Yan had been losing that fight, it was the 5th round, he was down on the scorecards, you could forgive him for frantically looking for a way to improve his position in the fight and not thinking clearly. But up to that very point, Peter Yan looked completely composed. He looked in complete control, and he was being a very intelligent fighter. And like, his fight IQ was really high anyway. So I think there's absolutely no excuse for the illegal strike. I think he only has himself to blame. I think all the hatred that's coming at Aljamain Sterling, granted, he hasn't helped himself after the fact with the pictures of Henry Cejudo, and now he's messaging saying that perhaps it's not Peter Yan next, which we all know it is going to be Peter Yan next. But in that moment itself, that there should be no hatred towards Aljamain Sterling. And if I throw it back to another fight, it was Greg Hardy's 4th professional fight, or 4th promotional fight possibly, where he got disqualified for an illegal knee of a downed opponent. And his opponent got absolutely no hatred for taking that DQ. And Greg Hardy got lambasted. Now, if you watch the podcast, you know I'm not a big fan of Greg Hardy. Absolutely not a fan of Greg Hardy. But I can't understand how we've seen such a change here in the fact that during that fight, Greg Hardy, or after that fight, Greg Hardy got a spewing of hatred from the MMA community. And in this one, it's on the other end. It's Aljamain Sterling who's getting it. My question, I suppose, I'll come to you, Liam, there first. You're an experienced corner man. You've been in the corner. And we heard from, it was during the commentary, that Khabib mentioned to one of them that his corner had asked him to strike and said it was okay to kick. Now, we're going to take Khabib's word as if it's true. Do you think there's some culpability on the cornerman, or is it entirely on the fighter himself?
No, I think if you're a UFC champion, you should know the rules. But at that stage, the fact that the bantamweight champion of the world doesn't know when a downed opponent is downed, And it wasn't like his knee was hidden. He was looking at Aljamain Sterling's knee on the ground. He couldn't miss it. So he made a very calculated decision to throw that knee, and it was just a dumb decision. It has cost him very, very dearly. The corner, I know that what Khabib said, the corner said that he could kick, or a word which in Russian also means knee and kick. I don't know. I don't know the absolute details on that. But before that, they said just punches. That's what was shouted in from the corner. Just punches. So if he didn't get it from that, and then he was still looking over for another cue, like you got one already. You're the bantamweight champ. You should know the rules. You got a cue from the referee who said down the opponent. You got a cue from your corner that said just punches, and you're still asking, how many freaking times do you need to be told? Do your job and be disciplined. He'd still be champion now, and we wouldn't even be talking about Aljamain Sterling if he had just held his discipline. I don't put the culpability on the corner at all. It's all Jan on this one.
Yeah, look, I 100% agree. I think it's just an error in judgment. He got it wrong on the night, and he has to face the consequences of that. The other big question that came out of this was, should Aljamain Sterling end up with the title for a DQ? And again, my issue goes back to, in a normal fight, if an illegal strike stops the fight, it's a disqualification. You cannot change the rules for that just because a title is on the line. At the end of the day, I'm not saying it would happen, but if you take a DQ title win out of the equation, if you have a title holder that's down in 4 rounds, what's stopping him coming out in the 5th round and trying to get points taken away, or trying to get that fight stopped illegally in such a way that he holds on to his belt? Yeah, exactly. I want to send a question there to Andy Hickey. You knocked it out of the park again on Twitter, as you usually do, surrounding the bantamweight division and the controversy about it. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about the history of the bantamweight division and the controversy that surrounded it?
Oh, so like the history of the bantamweight division starts with a Dominic Cruz 2.5-year layoff, doesn't fight, is the champion. Renan Barão has to fight 3 interim belts, eventually gets promoted, gets the belt taken off him by TJ Dillashaw in one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. They go to rematch the night before the weigh-ins. Barão hits the deck. Joe Soto, making his debut, former Bellator champion, comes in, gets well beaten. You've then got Cruz taking the belt off Dillashaw in a controversial decision. Not that I saw controversial. Garbrandt then one of the greatest performances of all time. On to Dillashaw again, and we see EPO gate come with Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo decides to retire after Dominic Cruz questions Keith Peterson's ability not to stay sober during a fight. And now we look forward. We have Jose Aldo fighting for a bantamweight title after never winning a fight at bantamweight, and we have the knee now. So it's pretty crazy. But you know, I'd harp back to one fight on this, and it'd be Anthony Smith and John Jones. Anthony Smith was a downed opponent against his cage and took a John Jones knee, got up and swallowed his pride and fought on. He could have been a world champion. Aljamain Sterling did the right thing, 100%. He's a world champion. There should be only 3 villains in this piece: Peter Yan, Mark Smith, the referee, and the doctor. Mark Smith saw a man take a full knee to the face and went and asked him, "Are you okay to fight?" It's not like he took a nut shot. He took a knee off Peter Yan to the face. At the time, I had a few beers with me, and Aljamain Sterling probably annoyed me, but as I reflect back on it now, I just see, you have to side with Sterling. And more to your point, though, of changing the rules for championship fights, it's already 5 rounds as opposed to 3 rounds, so they make exceptions already for it. So I could see it coming in. I don't want to see it come in, but I could see that rule coming in after it. Yeah.
No, 100%. And to your point on the play acting there, and that the referee and doctor were at fault, when they came in and he laid back, the fight should have immediately been called. They were having too many discussions in there, and I feel that kind of played into Sterling's need to act up a little bit. Like if they'd have come in, asked was he okay, he says no, they called the fight. There's less need for Aljamain to start wobbling about and feel the pressure, like he has to act it up a little bit. Just for Thomas there, do you believe that Aljo was acting up and kind of making the most of that situation?
To an extent, yeah. I think initially he wasn't expecting to be kneed. I think he wasn't expecting to take that kind of a strike. So I think initially he wasn't faking the reaction when he was knocked down, but then afterwards when he was rolling his eyes in the back of his head and slumping over, that doesn't look normal in MMA really. I suppose I know he was play acting a little bit, but as he said, it was really just to. It was just again because I suppose he felt he needed to. And can you blame someone? It's their career, and I suppose the fact that he's champion now, the pay is significantly higher for him. There's probably going to be pay-per-view points. It probably has an impact on sponsorships for him, and any other business interests he have, they'll all take a boost at the moment while he has this. And there's a lot of negativity around him celebrating afterwards. But I mean, if people look at those videos, that's his family trying to kind of, I suppose, help him celebrate it, because they probably saw how disappointed he was with that outcome and how it all went. But I mean, in nearly every event, somebody makes a mistake that costs them a fight. And in this case, Peter Yan made a mistake which cost him the fight, but it was his mistake. It wasn't Aljo's. So I think it's his responsibility. So it's tough luck, and he'll get to prove he's the better man in the rematch.
And you said it perfectly there. It was Jan's mistake, not Aljo's. But as I stressed beforehand, it seems to be Aljo that's getting most of the hatred here. For Ben, what do you make of the amount of hatred Aljo's getting, and do you believe that some of it is warranted, if any of it?
I think Aljo had a lot of hate to begin with. I mean, he's a pretty cocky guy anyway. I think that the amount of acting that they definitely showed on TV was unfortunate for him too. Like he did, like you said, when he laid back and rolled his eyes in his back of his head. It's like, that's unwarranted stuff. The guy asked you straight up after you took a direct knee to the face, can you go on? You know you're not going on. So just say you're not going on. I mean, there was never a chance that guy was going to stand up and fight, I don't believe. I don't think it was like a way out for him or anything, but I think that he took the opportunity to I don't think he wanted to win the belt that way, but I mean, the only way to stop guys from wanting to win the belt that way is to make it, if there is a DQ in a title fight, that nobody wins the belt.
Yeah, of course. And I'm going to quickly go around the panel here with two quick questions. As we have you on there, Ben, we'll start with you. One, is Aljamain the true champion at 135 pounds? And two, can there be any other fight than Aljamain and Peter Yan next?
I mean, the only way that you could even justify giving anybody other than Yan a title fight is Corey Sandhagen, because of the way that he's finishing people. I mean, that wheel kick knockout of Moraes and then that knee of Edgar. I mean, he's obviously a legitimate #1 contender. I think that would be a good way to kind of show Yan, you messed up here. That, like you said, it was 100% his fault. He knew he shouldn't have thrown that strike. He knew that it wasn't a strike to throw, excuse me. I mean, I guess Aljo's the champ because he did win, but I don't. Either way, that's not a good look for either one of those guys. And unless you're disciplining Yan by giving the title shot to Sandhagen, it's the only fight that makes sense is Yan versus Aljo too.
Yep. And Andy Hickey?
Yeah, I agree entirely. Aljamain Sterling's the champ. Yan is the #1 contender, and we do, Sandhagen, maybe Rob Font in there, and bring TJ Dillashaw back in around there. And I think, there would be a bit of structure to the division if they just do the rematch and reset it from there. It's not going to make a major difference, so go with it.
Perfect. Mr. Thomas Lan?
Yeah, I agree. I suppose if Aljo could have a quick turnaround, which he can't, I would say maybe try and make the Corey Sandhagen fight just on, I suppose, the strength of his resume compared with Peter Yan's. And again, I suppose if somebody makes a mistake that gets them knocked out in a fight, they don't get an immediate rematch because they made that one mistake. So I'm not that sold on the need for Peter Yan to get it based on that. But I suppose with the delay and with the storyline around it, I think, yeah, it is probably fairly warranted in that case.
Very good. And Liam Og?
Sorry, I'm on mute again. Whatever's going on upstairs, I don't want you to hear it. But yeah, I mean, like, yeah, on paper, Aljo is the champ. I think the only person that could say that Aljo is not the champ is Aljo. And if he said it, it would be I think his stock would go up. If he was to say, look, I don't feel like I won this. I'm not going to wear the belt. I'm not going to call myself the champ until I win that rematch, and then do the rematch, and then let's get it out of the way. All this messing about and posturing is just ruining the kind of the flow of the division. That division was so kind of on point. You know, Corey Sandhagen was coming up next. Now it's a kind of all over the place, and Henry Cejudo needs to just fuck off.
Yeah, it's interesting. I touched on this in our last episode, and fights that I was looking forward to most in March, and this was the fight that I gave, and for the reason that I wanted to see the division move on because of all the contenders that were there lining up at 135 pounds. I feel like we've come out of this one with a greater bottleneck at the top, and it's going to be a long time before we get a decisive champion at 135 pounds. And with TJ coming back into it in the talks of Henry Cejudo, it's turning into the lightweight division very, very quickly. Before we let you go, guys, I will ask that you head over to our YouTube channel. I know some of you are watching on YouTube now, some of you are watching on Facebook. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. We have lots of content coming out over the next week, and we have done all last week as well. This is content made for fans, by the fans, and be sure to hit the bell and be notified when our videos go live. I do want to thank the panel for coming on today. Do you have anything or anywhere you want to where we can find you on social media, Mr. Ben Doucette?
I'm going to have a Twitter handle here pretty soon. I'm not the most experienced guy when it comes to that, so I'm going to figure it out.
No problem. And Mr. Andy Hickey, we know where you are on Twitter, but give it a shout out.
You'll find me on Twitter at my unfortunate name with the last 5 years is Up to Dars. So you will find me there doing stats on a daily basis.
Very good. And Liam Og? Mute.
If they stop having sex upstairs, I could just let you listen to Liam OG Griffin. Check it out. I've got some guys trolling at the moment, so I could do with some friendlies in there.
No problem at all. And finally, Mr. Thomas Lan.
Yeah, my Twitter is an old one as well. It's Thomas Little Boy. So you can find me on that.
We have as a team, we have a bit of work to do on our Twitter handles, I feel. And you can find me at P_ODEA on Twitter, and be sure to like us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, subscribe, and you'll find us on Instagram as well, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you after UFC 260 with another episode of the MMA Opinion Roundtable. Thank you.